I'd like to introduce our Senior Vice President and Provost, Dr. Lon Moeller, to introduce our
Student moderator.
Student moderator.
Indeed. Welcome to the Embry-Riddle Presidential Speaker Series. We're certainly glad you're here. Special welcome to our esteemed guest and our host, Embry-Riddle President Dr. P. Barry Butler and Dr. Audrey Butler. I'd like to introduce at this point our student moderator, Owen Thieck. Owen is a senior from Cypress, Texas, majoring in Aviation Business Administration with a concentration in air transportation in the David B. O'Malley College of Business. Owen works as a student assistant in the Dean Suite in the college. We also serves as a peer mentor for our BA 101 Introduction to Business course. Owen is a business eagle and the chair of the College Committee on Student Advisory Board. This past summer, Owen was in Atlanta, Georgia, where he worked as a network planning and scheduling intern with Delta Airlines. This upcoming summer, Owen will be joining American Airlines as a hub and gateway operations strategy intern. Would you please welcome Owen Thieck.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to Embry-Riddle's series, Leading Through Turbulence, the Transformation of Alaska Airlines. Tonight, we'll be speaking with Mr. Bill Ayer, the retired chairman and chief executive officer of the Alaska Air Group, which includes both Alaska Airlines and their sister carrier, Horizon Air. Ayer received his Bachelor's of Science in Economics from Stanford University and his Master's in Business Administration from the University of Washington. Ayer started his career with Piper Aircraft before moving on to Air Olympia, which he founded. Following Air Olympia, he joined Horizon Air, where he spent 13 years and became the senior vice president of operations. Following Horizon, he joined Alaska Airlines in 1995 as the vice president of planning and marketing, where he subsequently held the roles of senior vice president, president, and chief operating officer before becoming chief executive officer in 2002. In 2003, he was also appointed chairman of the board. After a very successful tenure at Alaska Airlines, Mr. Ayer retired in 2013. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Bill Ayer.
Good evening, everybody. Great to be here.
I hope you've enjoyed your time on campus
Fabulous.
today.
Awesome. Got a full tour of the university. What a great place this is. I hadn't been here in 7 or 8 years, and when I came then, it wasn't really a tour. It was for a meeting. But I'm just blown away by how great this place is. So congratulations, Dr. Butler and the staff. Really well done.
Well, I had the pleasure of actually meeting with you earlier, so we've conversed a little bit. But talking to you and reading about you, you're a very different leader than most other CEOs of airlines here in the U.S. and globally. Can you talk to us a little bit about your leadership style?
Probably should talk to other people about that. I'll tell you what I think I try to do as a leader. I guess the first thing is communications and being transparent and being pretty plain spoken about things. Things are complicated enough in businesses and airlines in particular that if the communications isn't clear, you got to just compound the problems. So that's one thing. Another is focusing on optimism and realism. And so I'm basically an optimist. I think you need to be in most businesses because there's inevitable ups and downs. And so optimism is really important. But realism is important too. And if you just go through life always just sort of happy about everything, you may have a lot of problems that you never really get to. So I talked about this balance, sort of a tone from the top. And our board did this as well, which is optimism and realism, kind of both together, I think is really important. Collaboration is important. An airline's a complicated thing, so you want the pieces to be working together. A little bit of a downside or something to watch out for on collaboration, though, is you don't want to be so collaborative that you back off from asking hard questions or kind of fully vetting things. So that's the thing. You can go too far in the collaboration, and it's like we don't want to cause waves, we don't want to bring up issues, and you need to get that realism out there. And then I think resilience is important. I think because they are inevitable downturns, and so being at least persevering and being resilient is really important. And then maybe the last one is one of the lessons that I learned through this time, and we'll talk about what happened in the transformation of this company. but the idea of planning and execution. And what I've observed is, and maybe I'll just ask you, we'll turn the tables here and just ask you a question. And it's a little bit of an unfair question, and the answer is not as clear as I'm going to make it in the question. But if you had to pick in an organization between planning and execution, if those are kind of the two big staples that you do, those are kind of big stuff, right? We either plan or we execute. How many of you, just to show of hands, how many of you would say that planning is more important than execution? And how many would say execution is more important? Okay, so I tend to be on the execution side of things. It's an unfair question, you need both, right? But what I've observed in organizations, and we almost fell into this trap at Alaska, is that the planners want to just do it a little bit longer. It's not quite the perfect plan yet. We're not quite fully baked. We've got to plan a little bit more. And you never get around to the execution part, maybe for fear that it's not going to be that great. And timing on decisions actually matters. It's both the quality of the decision and the time frame in which you make it. And the stuff that we dealt with back in the mid-2000s, timing actually mattered. We might not be around if we hadn't moved quickly on things and didn't quite have the perfect plan. So that's the last thing I think is I tend to push people on execution, get the plan good enough, get it 85, 90% there. By the way, not with safety. Safety's got to be 100%, right? But get the business plan kind of close, and then just go out there and you'll learn stuff as you get out there. So that's a little bit of what I tried to do in my leadership role.
Building on execution and resilience, can you describe what the airline industry was like in the early 2000s and why Alaska chose to restructure on its own, then file for bankruptcy?
It was the airline industry, sure. The airline industry in the 2000s was really fouled up, and people will remember all the bankruptcies. As it turns out, every major carrier, with the exception of Alaska and Southwest, did at least one Chapter 11 filing during that time frame. I'm talking 2002 through 2006 or 7 or something like that. That was the time frame. Maximum turmoil. Some airlines did 2 Chapter 11s. We used to call that Chapter 22, just for the heck. But it was very messy, and in fact, we could have followed suit and done that as well. But what we decided to do was, let's see if we can fix the problems ourselves. Let's see if we can, and if we do that, if we don't just call in the bankruptcy lawyers and pay them a bunch of money to kind of unscramble things, if we actually do it ourselves and fix the problems, my thought was we would learn so much about the business, and we would engage so many employees about how to fix things and how to run a good airline, and recognizing that change is constant, right? So yeah, we had a big mess in 2002, 3, 4, whatever it was, but if you don't know how to fix stuff, if you don't know how to deal with change effectively, you'll just get yourself in another big mess a few years down the road. So we decided we were going to use this as a learning opportunity, and we did. I think we pretty well maximized the learning opportunity. And long story short is we got through this. But boy, it's anything but a straight line, and that's something you need to understand. And when you look back at the trend line, it's positive for sure. But boy, has it got a lot of wiggles in it, right, as it goes up. And there are good days and bad days in there, and that's why this resilience that I mentioned is really important. You got to just stick with it, and you got to communicate like crazy to the employees about what's going on. When you have successes, you want to celebrate the heck out of those, and then also at the same time, optimism. You know, things are we actually had surprised, but boy, we got more things to work on. And then you get a little bit of a flywheel effect where the people start seeing positive things, and then they get an idea that they can do more. And so you get some energy out of that, and that's kind of what we did. But communication is really important as you go through that.
So can you talk about some of the lessons specifically that you learned while you were going through that time in Alaska?
A whole bunch. And you're not going to go through a transition like this without making a whole bunch of mistakes. So don't start thinking you're going to try to do it perfectly. You don't want to have perfection as the standard, or you'll just always be disappointed. So that's the first thing, is realize the reality of what you're dealing with, and it's really, really hard. I actually wrote out a whole bunch of, I wrote out 8 or 9 lessons learned, and I might just take a quick look at that.
So you're definitely a planner.
I'm a planner. I've actually talked to people about this at the time we did this. I said, these are some of the things that we're learning. And so this is several years old, but the first thing is get the right people on the bus. And that's everybody read Jim Collins, the good to great and that kind of stuff. So that's one of his terms, is get the right. So we used that, was to get the right. Jim actually came to one of our strategy sessions as we were getting into this thing, and helped us think through it. So get the right people on the bus, create a sense of urgency. So we'd lost $200 million, and you just need to communicate that. That's just not acceptable. And you can get yourself kind of lulled into a false sense of security if you're used to losing money all the time. It's like, yeah, another quarter, another big loss, no big deal. In fact, I got in the habit of listening to the quarterly earnings calls with the other airline CEOs. So public companies always do webcast earnings calls on their quarterly earnings. And I thought it was an opportune time to listen to what are the other airlines saying. It's all public information. What are they saying about their situation, and what are they doing to make it better? And it's one of the things that got me and my team really going on trying to fix this problem ourselves, because it was just stark what we heard from almost all the other CEOs, some of which were in bankruptcy, was, yeah, here's a big loss, but you know what, this is a really tough environment, we're doing the best we can, and just kind of tell the analysts, the Wall Street analysts, kind of give us a break. You know what, it's a tough environment. And they would cite things like high fuel prices and irrational competition and government taxation and a whole bunch of things. It was kind of a bunch of excuses. And while those things may be reality and you need to factor them into your planning and your execution, it's not the whole story. You don't just stop with that and say, it just is what it is. So we came up with this thing that said, control what you can control. And that means the stuff that's given, yeah, that's good information. You have to know that when you build the plan, but it's not the whole story. So then get on with controlling what you can control and start, getting people together to put together a couple of big initiatives and go work on problems, which is this idea of working on only one or two big ideas at a time when you're in a situation like this. And we had fallen into a trap, and maybe those of you have seen this other places, where an organization does an annual planning conference. And you go away to a nice hotel for a week and you put a bunch of stuff up on the wall, right? And at the end of the week, it's like you just boiled the ocean. You've just solved all the problems in the world, and you go back to work. Maybe that's on a Friday, and you leave, and you roll up the paper. Now it'd be on a computer, but in those days we'd roll up the paper and we'd head off and come in Monday morning, and I'd sit down, I'd unroll the paper, and I'd say, what were we thinking? We've already got full-time jobs. Who's going to do all this stuff? And so we kind of lived that way for a while, and we were kidding ourselves that we were getting a lot done just because we wrote down a lot of stuff. But when push came to shove, where we actually had to fix some problems, like a high cost structure, in order to survive, we said, we better not have this charade where we write down 20 or 30 things and feel good about it. We actually better write down one or two things that really matter, and we better go execute on them. So this is this idea of shorten the to-do list and work on a couple of really big strategic things that are going to matter. And there's appropriate ownership, metrics, names, dates, and you actually get stuff done, and you kind of project manage the thing. And so we did that. Metrics along the way are really important. So what you measure gets managed is the expression, right? And that's really, really important. And so when we go into an initiative review with somebody, it wouldn't be 15 minutes of conversation about how's it going. It would be one piece of paper with a scorecard. And here's the gap, here was our goal, here's our current performance, that's the gap, and here are the things we're going to do to close the gap. And then as CEO and the senior team, we'd say, how can we help you? That's exactly what we're looking for. It's not a lot of talk. It's just like, this is the stuff. These are the facts, and this is what we're working on. And it just became a whole lot more productive, and we got stuff done, as opposed to the old world where it was sort of yabba-dabba-doo, lots of conversation, lots of things, and we didn't move the needle very much on any one of them. I talked about controlling what you can control. Customer focus is really important. Here's a personal one that I think is really interesting. Don't confuse being popular with doing the right thing, at least in the short term. So all of us want to be liked, right? And to some to a higher degree than others of us. And when you come down to a transformation like this, you got to do what you got to do. You got to get the job done. And so it's not like you're running out polling, asking people what they think of you. It's like, we're taking our best shot at this. We think this is the important stuff that needs to get done, and you just go do it. And my experience is, the team is plenty popular after we get all through this when we actually have success. And so don't get caught up in, people not liking you or looking at you sideways or whatever. It's just this is really serious business. We've got to get it done, and we're going to have to kind of, not worry about individual reactions to things in the near term. And the last one was just develop partnerships. And you all do that really well at this university. We did it with code-share partners in the airline industry and marketing partners of various sorts. And you're not in this by yourself. You've got other people that can help you. So that's kind of a list of 7 or 8 things that I took away and our team took away from this pretty tumultuous period in the mid-2000s.
And when we talk about people and partnerships in a different way, we've talked about mentors before, but do you think it's important to have mentors in the workplace?
I think it's really important, and I was always lucky that way. And typically, my mentors were my bosses. there's no formula for mentorship, and from what I've seen, but I think it's important that you find people that can help you, that can answer questions that you have. Fundamentally, business is about two things. It's about people and it's about change. And if you just kind of go to 40,000 feet and just think about that. So it's about people and it's about change. The people side of it really matters. That means leadership matters. It means board governance matters. And the people side of it is development. And so you want people on your team that are curious about things and they want to move ahead, they want to do more, they want to contribute more, they want to add more value. And we often need help to do that. We need to figure out what is it we don't know, where can other people help us, what kind of network do we need to build for ourselves so we can understand the world better. So I'm just a big fan, and the people side of this equation I think doesn't get enough attention, and mentoring is a way that you can develop that.
Have you had any mentors or have been a mentor to anyone at Alaska or in the industry in general?
Yeah, I would say more informally than formally. But as I say, my boss mentored me. I was just lucky because I got the opportunity to do all kinds of stuff. And all I had to do was say yes when presented the opportunity. And every job I had I thought was the best job in the company. But I started out in marketing and planning, and then at Horizon, at the regional, we bought other airlines. We did a whole fleet deal. I got to schedule airplanes. I got to set prices. I got to integrate fleets and people and pilot domiciles. And then I got to learn about the operation. I got to spend time in maintenance and flight operations. And it just was an opportunity. And he said, would you like to go do this? I said, sure. If you think I can add value here, and I'm sure going to learn something from it. And so the main thing I did was you just say yes. And then what came of it, and made me a believer in this notion of lateral moves on an organization chart. It made me a believer in the value of when you have somebody that you know is going to move up the organization over time, giving them opportunities to do other things maybe at the current level that they're at. So they're a manager or director level person, maybe they're in marketing. Wouldn't it be great if they got some time in operations? And then when it's time to promote them, they now have a much better understanding. They're more well-rounded. They understand how the organization works, what the interdependencies are in the various divisions of the company. And they're just and they know more people, and more people trust them. And trust is a really important quality for a leader. So you just have a much more successful promotion of that person if they've spent some time kind of left and right on the org chart, as I call it, laterally on the org chart before moving vertically, if that makes sense.
Right. And do you think it's important for departments to work together as opposed to functioning individually?
Totally. Yeah, I think too many organizations are siloed. As I said, the only caution is you don't want to be overly collaborative to the point that you don't want to raise issues. So there's a healthy tension in this somewhere, and it ebbs and flows a little bit depending on what's being dealt with. But ultimately, you want people to see we're all on the same team. We may have an intellectual disagreement about something, and it's important to express that and resolve it. But ultimately, we're all on the same team, and it's not like you're the competitor over on the planning side. And because I always told our people when I saw that going on in my team, I'd say, look, we don't have time, we don't have energy for internal competition. The competitor is outside the company. Let's all understand that. And then if you did these lateral moves, a lot of that just disappeared because people knew each other, and they wouldn't then take shots, and they wouldn't act like there's an internal competitor. So that lateral thing, the development piece, actually helped reduce internal competition. Internal competition is a bit of a human nature. It's kind of a natural thing as the organization gets bigger, and everybody's kind of looking around and what's happening here. And I just found that to be a good antidote with these development plans of people spending time in other parts of the company.
Right. So we've talked about unique attributes. When I think of Alaska, I think of all the cities in Alaska that they serve, and these people rely on them for essential cargo or transportation across the state. Can you talk about Alaska and how they serve the state, even though you're based in Seattle?
It's a really interesting question and a good point, Owen. I look back at the brand of Alaska. It has a lot to do with our history in the state of Alaska. How many people have been to Alaska? Cool. So there's just tons of little communities up there. And you also know that there's no roads. So everybody's isolated. And so air service is really, really important. And air service isn't just moving metal from point A to point B. It's actually, the airline is it actually becomes part of the sort of the social fiber of the community, because it's how everything moves. It's how medicine and healthcare is transported, people going to doctors or doctors coming in or whatever. It's how high school basketball teams play their game on Saturday night. They've got on an airplane and fly to another community. So as I look back at the history, and it was interesting to note that, so deregulation happened in 1978. Prior to that, you had to get government approval to fly routes and set your fares. And that tended to go to people that had a lot of clout with Congress, because Congress ultimately decided that. Little old Alaska Airlines up to that point had very little clout in Congress. So in 1978, we had 10 airplanes, 9 cities in the state of Alaska, and Seattle, and that was the airline. We thought we were pretty cool, but that was it. That was all we had. And so as we started to grow after deregulation, and we grew very successfully, we kept this small town brand. And so the people that worked for the company grew up in these villages, and they knew everybody. And so the brand of customer service that evolved at Alaska was sort of a neighbor helping neighbor kind of thing. It was very genuine, very real. Nothing was made up. And the flight attendant group, the leadership group that came from that environment, managed to, and people say, how does management keep such great customer service on the airplanes? And all I said was, we just get out of their way and let them do it because they're great at it. And we just mess it up if we try to intervene. And they basically kind of were the police of customer service. And if we made a hiring mistake, which you always do, they would go make sure that hiring mistake either got corrected and the person fell in line with the service philosophy of the company, or that person just kind of felt rejected and didn't stick around. And it's just amazing to me, when you talk about a culture, a high customer service culture like that, how the culture kind of polices itself once it gets going. And that's what we had, still have at the company. So the brand, the customer service brand of the company very much has everything to do with the roots in the state of Alaska, if that makes sense to people. This small community kind of feel. So that was a real strength. And then the trick was, how can we continue to hold on to that as we go into cities like Newark, right, and Miami and all the places that we ended up going to? And I think the answer is pretty much yes. And it's because we still have that core group of people, and it's just become part of what we do. It isn't even questioned that this is the way you operate in terms of customer service. And it's very cool, and I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen it myself in action. So that's a little bit of the Alaska history and why that's important to the brand of the company.
Right, and so in the last 5 years, we've seen Alaska transition into newer cities like the Midwest, for example, Milwaukee or Pittsburgh. Why is Alaska moving beyond those traditional boundaries, and why are they pushing the envelope here in the U.S.?
So, and you know as much about this, Owen, than I do, probably more at this point, given your internship recently at Delta. By the way, Delta's a great airline. I'm not slamming Delta at all, or anybody else. But networks, like route maps for airlines, you try to do things that are synergistic. So just as in 1979, when we could first grow the airline beyond Seattle, we did things that kind of made sense. We knew people that lived in the state of Alaska wanted to go to other places, and in particular, the biggest destinations were down the coast. So we started service to Portland, we started service to the Bay Area and the LA Basin, Mexico. We had a seasonal problem because in Alaska it's real cold and dark in the wintertime, and the tourism travel isn't there. It happens in the summer. Alaska's very seasonal. The air traffic to the state of Alaska is very seasonal because most of it's actually tourism from outside of Alaska. So we needed a place to fly airplanes in the wintertime as we grew the fleet. And so that's why some of these counter-seasonal markets made sense to us, like Mexico. Palm Springs was early on in the growth of the company. And what you look for, Seattle is kind of still the hub, and a hub means that's a place where people can make connections onto other airplanes. So you start growing a network, and you actually time flights to make connections. It also means you time flights for congestion, because you want everybody on the ground at the same time. When you fly through Atlanta from here, you see that, right? And there are times of the day in Atlanta where there are almost no airplanes at the Delta gates. They do that on purpose. You'd say, well, that's crazy. Why you gang up everybody at once? Well, it's so you can facilitate the flow of passengers, the connections across that hub, and you can go from Daytona to Atlanta, Daytona Beach to Atlanta to Seattle, like the way I got here in reverse, with only 40 minutes on the ground in Atlanta. And that's real good network utility. So we started growing through Seattle, and we started looking at what were the biggest destinations, and there's great data about, while it's deregulated, you still have to file traffic data with the government. I don't know why exactly, but the DOT wants to keep track of how many people are moving in the country on airplanes. So that's all public data, and so you can actually go in and you can look at what are the origin and destination numbers, they call it, the O's and D's, right? How many people are going between these places. And then we just started picking off the bigger markets. And the more you do, it adds up, right? It's like 1 + 1 = 3 at some point. And you get more and more people going to all these cities, and then you can add more frequency, and you can add bigger airplanes, and hopefully you can generate a little bit more revenue.
And when we're talking about the hubs, starting in 2012, we saw Delta set their sights on Seattle as their next big growth venture. But Alaska has been able to maintain their market share, and their customer service and on-time performance is at an all-time high. How have they been able to maintain that?
It's a very interesting question, because in a more normal time, you'd say if an airline came in, if a carrier had an established market like Alaska had, and somebody came in with added flights, it would just dilute from that. You wouldn't think the pie would get any bigger. You think they'd just take a slice of the pie. Now, whether that slice is big enough to exist on is another question. But what we saw in the case of Seattle was the pie actually got bigger. So you're right. Delta came in to build a hub in Seattle. We used to have a partnership with Delta, and I'm not exactly sure what happened. But anyway, it's a free world. They can do whatever they want. So they decided they were going to make Seattle a hub and compete directly with their former partner, Alaska. Once we kind of got our head around that, and I was kind of transitioning at the time, which probably really ticked off my successor, which is like, where are you going now? It's like, we got Delta coming after us. I was just encouraging to him. I said, just take them on. You guys are great. You know, we got a great reputation, and don't back away. And so part of it is preference for one airline or the other. Part of it, I have to believe, is Seattle, which is just an economy on fire. Right? I mean, we've got Microsoft and Amazon and everybody and all the tech stuff, and it's just crazy. We've had a remarkable economy exists in Seattle, Washington, and has for the last several years. So I think this came along at a time when the economy, the population was growing. Travel, millennials love to travel, so that segment of the population was really what was growing. The tech, new folks coming in to work for these tech companies that just have travel as a part of their lifestyle, which is great. And it all kind of worked. The other thing is there is a stimulative effect of additional service. And there are actually models that you can apply and say, well, you know, if you put a nonstop in where there'd been a one-stop flight in a market, you're going to grow traffic by so much. And if you add a second nonstop and a third and so forth. So people will fly because it's convenient. It may have a depressing effect on fares a little bit, which actually stimulates demand, right? Supply and demand. So it all kind of worked. And at the end of the day, you got two airlines that are existing in Seattle. Alaska, I think, better than ever. And as far as I know, Delta's doing fine as well. So it's interesting. But there was certainly a lot of wringing of hands about how's this going to work out. I guess I'd also add that having a competitor, as long as it isn't squashing you in your business, is not the worst thing in the world, because it keeps employees focused. And it gives you, as the leader, something to talk about. Everybody loves to hear about competitive battles, right? So little skirmishes going on around the network, around the route network, I never saw that as a big problem. People are focused. You said we've got to build a better schedule. We've got to make sure the airplanes are clean. We've got to make sure the customer service is great. The flight attendants are friendly. We're on time. Of course, the first thing in all of this is what? We got to be safe. And I don't want to go any further tonight without saying safety is number one for airlines. And I can talk more about specific initiatives at Alaska that we did to ensure that and kind of make it part of the culture. Because I don't think it always was, and it probably wasn't always part of the culture at most airlines, at least not that visible. And we made it so, and I'm happy to talk more about that. It's really, really important. But anyway, a competitor keeps you on your game, and I like that. Otherwise, you can get big, and we've all seen this with other companies, right? And you can get big, success goes to your head, and pretty soon you're not on top anymore before you know what happened. And I always thought a little productive, I used to call it productive paranoia was a good thing. Who's about to come after us? And let's try to discourage them whenever we can. And it's just great communication with employees about what's going on in our markets and what can everybody do to have us win more and the competitor not. And I like it. I like competition a lot. It's good for everybody.
Do you think Alaska used Horizon as a tool in that moment, because they do have a wholly owned subsidiary, to succeed in Seattle?
Sure. Horizon was an important part. So back up just a little bit. Alaska Air Group bought Horizon. I was at Horizon when Alaska bought us at the end of 1986. And that was very much of a strategic move by Alaska to provide feed into this growing Seattle hub and get the smaller cities that 737s and big airplanes couldn't fly to. So Horizon had, at the time of the acquisition, Horizon had Dash 8s and Metroliners. And so we could have lots of frequency from the little places. Those of you that know the Northwest, you know places like Eugene and North Bend, Oregon, Redmond Bend, you know Wenatchee, Washington, Pasco, Yakima, those kind of places. And so that was great. It was a great strategy. And when you put the designator, you put the AS designator on the Horizon airplane, you then show very prominently in all of the systems, and what you see in your on your internet when you go in and look at it, is you see those flights very prominently displayed. It drives the connections that way. The other thing would be gauge of airplane. Would be you want to fly the right airplane in the right market. So even today, many of these Midwest markets start out being Embry-Riddle 175s at Horizon and not 737s. Now often they move to that as you prove the market. Maybe you start out with one flight a day, and then maybe you add a second with the Embry-Riddle jet, and then you see the volumes, you say, oh, now we can actually put a 737 in there. And so there's an evolution that way as well. Alaska still has many markets out of Seattle that are just one flight a day. And when that's the case, it's really saying that we're trying to serve the Pacific Northwest traveler. It's often a 8 a.m. out of Seattle and a 5 p.m. back from the East Coast. And we're really not going after the East Coast-based traveler. It's really still, we're serving the Northwest, and that's just the return flight. And the people on that return airplane will be mainly people that live in the Northwest. And that's still the case, but I think slowly over time we'll get more traffic that's originating, point of sale originating on the destination, the long-term destination.
In terms of transformation and building traffic, we think about consolidation. So Alaska merged with Virgin America. Can you describe that, and then maybe talk a little bit about consolidation in the industry?
Yeah, so mergers have been around forever, and Alaska's position had been, until the Virgin America merger, had been, let's basically build this ourselves. Let's do organic growth, and we'll target, pick a number, 3, 4, 5, 6% a year, depending on how the economy is, and we'll just we'll buy airplanes from Boeing, and we'll just grow that way. I think, I wasn't there, but I think, but two exceptions to that. One was Alaska bought a company called Jet America back in the early 80s, which was a Long Beach-based company, and that was a successful merger, and then bought Horizon, although it didn't merge Horizon. You can acquire a company and not merge it. And so that's what Alaska did with Horizon, was to buy it and continue to operate it separately. Separate management team and everything, and that's why I stayed at Horizon for as long as I did after the acquisition. Today, there's more merging on the branding side. The airplanes are painted and say Alaska on them, operated by Horizon, but the big bold on the side of the airplane is Alaska on the Horizon airplane. And I think that's smart at this point. So the Alaska Virgin America merger is pretty well done. It was pretty costly because there was a bidding war with JetBlue that Alaska got involved in. And I think the other thing that I think if Brad Tilden were here, he would say that the cultures were more different than was anticipated when that merger was put together. The view, and certainly my view from afar, was the Virgin America. Anybody fly Virgin America? When they were, yeah. The high customer service, right? High service, high touch kind of airline. And it turns out that it wasn't as much that. I think it was, you've heard this term, high touch, high tech, kind of go together. And Virgin was more of the technology, at least in terms of the food service on the airplane, and just less engaging contact with the flight attendant, for example. You got a captive audience on the airplane. We want to use technology as much as we can. We were the first to have kiosks. We moved really quickly on mobile apps for check-in and so forth. But on the airplane, I always thought you wanted to have high touch. You got the flight attendant there, So why don't we have an engaging experience? Virgin didn't do that so much, and so I think there was a little bit of push and pull, and they've worked through it. One of the best ways to work through it is to actually assign flight attendants from each company on the same airplane, and they're now doing that. And people will start to see, it's like a little bit like this lateral move. You'll start to see things more similarly as you spend time together. It's just human nature. So that's a really good move, and I think they're past kind of the difficult part of that merger and getting some of the benefit. The Virgin merger, by the way, got Alaska gates at San Francisco, and there's no other way to get gates at SFO. It just isn't. You could spend 20 years getting 5 gates. Get on the list and then go lobby them, but it's just going to be about impossible. So that acquisition got them a very major presence at an important airport. So I think in retrospect, it's going to work out really well.
And you mentioned culture. Can you talk about how important culture is and maybe what Alaska's culture is?
Yeah, there's an expression that culture eats strategy for breakfast, if you haven't heard that one. Both are important, but that's how important culture is. And so I think Alaska's culture, as I've described, is this kind of high-touch, engaging experience. It's a customer experience. It's certainly safety is number one. On-time performance matters. The culture internally is collaboration, sometimes to a fault, where people don't raise big enough issues with each other. That's why I mentioned that. I think they've seen a little bit of that it's like, yeah, maybe I'm big on working together, and I've seen enough examples where people don't work together that should. And by the way, universities, some are good and some aren't so good at interdisciplinary. You folks here appear to be extraordinary at doing interdisciplinary work. I'm on the Board of Regents at University of Washington, and for as big as we are, we're pretty good at that as well. So collaboration is important, but to a fault, you can end up kind of being soft and not working on the most important issues or pushing hard enough, leaning into the most important issues enough. And culture evolves a little bit over time, but I think Alaska has a great culture, and I think it works. You think about, as we sat down to do this transformation, we had to write some stuff down because we had to go communicate to the employees what we were about to do and what we were going to ask them to do. And we said, so we want to be a great airline. Well, if you just stop there, people say, yeah, that's easy to say. For who? For whom do you want to be a great airline? And we said, well, for our stakeholders. Okay, who are your stakeholders? Well, there are customers, our communities, our employees, and our owners. And then you start saying, and so what does that mean? What does it mean to be a great airline for customers? What does it mean to be a great airline for employees? And we then put words around that, and we put metrics around that. And for the customer side, we had safety. We had safety for employees as well. We had on-time performance. One of the things is you can have unintended consequences. When you start making big changes to an organization, it's human nature for people to kind of get distracted and lose focus. You can't let that happen in an airline with respect to safety, and it didn't happen. But we had to make a big point out of that, which means you've got to be measuring lots of things about safety so you see some early warning signs if that's happening. So for employees, it meant that we wanted secure retirements. It means we wanted people to have upward mobility and promotion opportunities. For customers, it was on-time performance, a great customer experience, easy to do business with, which drove us to do more with technology. And then the last group, for owners, it's like, well, they want a return on their investment. And if we do this well enough, and we talked about a 10% return on invested capital as the metric that we chose to measure. And if we do that, then the ownership, the shareholders, are going to want us to grow and do more, and they want to be able to invest more. And so all of those things happened that we wrote down. And I'm not boasting, and it wasn't about me at all. It was about a team that we just, and it's always luck and everything, but our team performed magnificently over those 6 or 7 years. And like I say, every night I went home, I didn't tell my wife that. I said, today was tough. Sometimes it was great. Sometimes we saw clear signs of success. Sometimes we had the opposite. But when you back off and look at it, like I said earlier, the trend line was up, clearly up. And we accomplished a very high percent of what we set out to do. And these were not like, easy goals. We didn't give ourselves a break on the goals because it was the survival of the company and it was the long-term success of the company. You don't want to just do this for 6 months and say, thank God that's over. I would often tell employees that. It was like, so we just went through some really tough stuff here, and I hope nobody is saying, thank God that's over, we can go back and be what we used to be, because that's not the way this works, right? We have structural change in our environment. And that was one of the key things that I think resonated with people was when we defined structural versus cyclical. And as I go back and think about those earnings calls that the CEOs were on that I listened to, a lot of them wanted to be describing cyclical change in their business and not structural change. And so you just think about how difficult it is when you come from a company that's had, and we were very proud of I think it was 17 or 18 consecutive years of profitability at Alaska. And we got a little bit full of ourselves, just between us, because what happened was not going to produce an 18th consecutive year of profitability. And yet we thought it would for the longest time into that year. And then when that happened, we thought the next year, well, that's just an anomaly. That's not really what's happening. We're really good, and we're going to get back to being profitable. Just got to wait this out. So those are all the signs that you're talking about, that you're believing that what you're seeing in your environment is cyclical, not structural. And when we really broke through this and said we got to get to work, is when we decided that what we were seeing was much more structural than cyclical, and it's not going to change back. And we're the ones that are going to have to change. And then we started making progress. But for the longest time, you want to talk yourself into it not being that bad. And it's not going to take that kind of effort and that kind of work and that kind of heartache and all that comes with it. But when you finally get there, there's a little bit of peace in it. It's like, okay, now we know what we have to deal with. And now we're just going to go do it. And every day, you've kind of got a direction and a North Star, and you start having success, and you start complimenting people on the progress, and then you can do more, and then you can do more. And it actually is a lot of fun. Didn't seem like it so much at the time, but you feel really good about making the progress. We had lunch earlier, and I was just saying, when you think about a company to go to work for, you often are persuaded to go to work for the company that already is the superstar in the industry. They're the winner. But if you have a little perspective on this and you look at what happens over time, the winner today is not necessarily the winner 5 or 10 years from now. And sometimes it's interesting to go to work for somebody that's got some real issues that you can now be an important part of helping straighten out. And you've got a lot more runway ahead of you if you do that. So just advice for the students here, when you go to look for a company, you don't just automatically go to the one that's leading and everybody who says that's who I'd work for. Think about it. Think about what role you're going to have. Who your boss is really important. This is this mentoring idea. Who your boss is really matters. And if it's somebody that you trust and is going to help you get ahead, even if the company's a little bit screwed up and they've made some mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But you can come in and you can be helpful and you can learn a lot in the process. So just a little bit of a pitch for don't necessarily shun the company that's having problems because there could be more upside both for the company and for you personally in your career at a place like that, which is why you're going to American. No,
That's
I didn't
correct.
say that. Just for an internship. I think it's a good move.
We'll see.
I really do.
At the end of the summer, I'll be able to tell, right?
Cool.
Hopefully.
Yeah, right.
But you mentioned safety, and focusing on safety, there's a large looming importance of safety in the industry, both from the manufacturer, the operator, and the educational standpoint. Can you talk about why it's so important to focus on improving safety?
So this industry has made remarkable advances in safety. And just when we thought it couldn't get any safer, it got a whole lot safer. And it's safer than getting out of bed in the morning, is how safe it is. It wasn't always like that. There was a time, I remember a quote from somebody, a safety analyst 20 years ago, who was extrapolating the growth in airplanes in the U.S. airline fleet, and made the statement that if we continue with the same accident rate that we've had, we're going to have an accident like once every 2 weeks, some of which will be fatal. That's just so totally unacceptable that even the rate, was as decent as it was, needed to come down a whole bunch if we were going to grow this fleet and the number of operations. And that's exactly what happened. And it happened because of people. It's all people. Business is all about people. And it's people that cared and people that wanted to do this. We at Alaska, so a quick history here is we had an accident in 2000. I never thought our company would have an accident. I thought we were safe. I thought we were buttoned up as could be. But we had an accident. And so a lot of soul searching happened from that accident, and a lot of our employees were on the airplane. And we just vowed right then and there that we were going to do everything we possibly could to never have that happen again. And I vowed right then and there that I would start every single employee meeting with the statement that safety is number one, nothing is more important, and you have the authority to stop anything in the flight operation if you think it's unsafe. And we're not going to question that. You have the authority, and our expectation is that you will. And I think I actually delivered on that promise for, the rest of the time. So 10 years or so I was CEO. I think I started every meeting saying that. But what we then did, we followed that up with really important action. So we adopted every technology, every flight deck technology that was out there. We adopted all of the best practices, the ASAP programs, the AQP, everything we could do to learn about what was going on our flight decks and what was going on in maintenance to make sure that we were safe. And all sorts of audits, LOSA audits, as you know that term, line-oriented audits on the airplane. And I became a big fan of, I became a little bit of a student of aviation safety and became a huge fan of non-punitive reporting, which is basically what an ASAP program is. And while some people would say, oh my God, I can't believe how many ASAPs we got, I'd say, bring them on. This stuff's happening out there, and we need to know about it. So the more reports, the better. And there's an expression that a reporting culture is a safety culture. What you don't want is people sitting up in the cockpit and something happens, they bust an altitude or do something, and say, don't tell anybody. And that went on way too long in this industry. It went on for many, many years. And it isn't until you expose those things, and you only expose them with a non-punitive system, where nobody's going to have a violation or a civil penalty or whatever. It's just, we just want to know so we can make it better. And we had an opportunity to, the whole industry, that's how the whole industry has gotten better, in my opinion, is non-punitive reporting. It's just a huge part of this. And then you go rework procedures. Altitude busts were a very, very common thing 20, 30 years ago, where an airplane would be assigned an altitude by the controller and they'd blow through it. And if it didn't cause a separation issue with an airplane above it, it didn't get reported, and the crew would just look at you and say, oh man, I can't believe I did that, don't tell anybody. Well, in an ASAP environment, you're actually encouraged to report that. And what were the circumstances around it? And what was the procedures? What came out of all these altitude busts, by the way, was a standard industry procedure about how you set the altitude into the altitude selector in the autopilot, and the verbals between the two pilots, the CRM between the two pilots about what they say. Read back the clearance, say it to the other person, set it in, point to it. At 1,000 feet to go, as you're climbing, for example, the chime goes off. The pilot not flying says 1,000 to go and holds up one finger. This is any cockpit you get into in the United States, if you're in the jump seat, you will watch this procedure. Everybody does it exactly the same way. That only came about because we recognized the industry was busting altitudes all over the place, and we only found out about that because we put in place non-punitive reporting. That's just a very simple example, and there are all kinds of examples like that. So anyway, I became, more than you wanted to know, but I became pretty fascinated with this whole topic, and how do we have such a complicated operation operate with such great safety, and it's people, it's technology, and it's people's use of technology.
And from what I understand, you sit on several boards and committees to improve safety here in the U.S. among different airlines and manufacturers and the government in general.
I've been involved in a couple of FAA committees, which are really interesting. The Next Gen Advisory Committee and a current one, which is Safety Oversight. Alan is on that committee with me, and so it's fun. The FAA puts together some good committees, and they're joint FAA and industry, which makes it work. So an FAA understands that they need the industry with them to actually understand the issues, and then it's like my planning and execution, right? To plan the right thing and to go execute the right thing. When I was on the Next Gen committee, we actually got around to having the industry participating in the execution of the changes, not just the planning. And I raised that as an opportunity because of this whole planning versus execution, that question I asked you folks at the beginning of this, because of my belief that organizations fall down in execution more often than they fall down in planning. And so I kind of pushed FAA on it, and we actually made some progress in terms of getting stuff out into the national airspace system, not just having it be a plan that sits on a shelf and collects dust, but actually go put it in place and have the industry participants on these committees actually help go put it in place.
And do you think that as we start off 2020 that the role of the FAA is more important now than ever?
Well, certainly the MAX raises lots of questions, I don't know enough to comment, and I shouldn't say a lot more other than there's lots of things to be looked at, and I hope we can end up in a place that doesn't compromise innovation and technological development, but also doesn't compromise safety. And I think we just need to look at that equation and understand all the parts of it and do the right thing. Because something certainly went wrong in this example. And you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you also don't want to do nothing. So I think that's the dilemma, is what do we do, and how do we not, it'd be very easy to overreact. And that's happened before in situations like this. We don't want to overreact and actually harm the U.S. industry on the global stage. We got too much, there's too much good stuff here, there's too much great technology, there are too many smart people. We don't want to encumber it with excess stuff. But we also need to be safe.
And speaking to smart people, our students here in the audience, do you have any advice for them, especially ones that may be pursuing careers in management?
I think students are really well set up coming out of this university. I was impressed before I came down here yesterday, and I'm way more impressed today even than that. So you've got a great pedigree, you've got great, a great program, whatever you major in. And I would, you're going to have lots of job opportunities. This institution has a fabulous reputation. You're going to be able to do all kinds of things. And in the course of your career, you're going to be able to do unbelievable things. The way this industry is going with, UAS and commercial space flight and all sorts of stuff that's coming down the road with technology. So, when you get out there in the working world, just look for opportunities to do cool stuff. And you don't need to be like me and make a decision to be somewhere 30 years. I didn't start out thinking I was going to be there for 30 years. I went to work for Horizon. It was this tiny little startup that we didn't have a nickel to rub between our fingers. And I told my wife, I said, this job's going to last about 6 weeks and I'll be back on the street looking for something else to do. And it ended up being 31 years later or whatever. It's kind of amazing. But you don't have to sign up to the first place you work, obviously. I know you won't. But look for opportunity. Look for people that you can learn from. Look for good bosses and mentors. And ask really good questions. One of the things I've learned, it probably doesn't seem like it tonight because I'm talking so darn much, but I've learned there's a huge value in asking good questions. I sit on a number of boards, and that's the primary role of a board member, a board of directors, is to ask really good questions. And as you move up, if you decide to move into leadership roles in a management capacity in an organization, the farther you move up in the organization, the less you're expected to be any kind of a technical expert at all about anything. And the more you're expected to be a good judge of people and be good at building teams and especially be good at asking the right questions, asking good strategic questions. And that's a skill that you have to develop. It doesn't come automatically to most people. It didn't come automatically to me. But you think about what's the best question I can ask in this situation of my team to get them headed in the right direction. And they need to own it. You can't, and this is one of the challenges as you move up. You come into a job as kind of the subject matter expert. And as you get opportunities to be promoted, maybe you move left and right like I talked about, right? But as you get opportunities to be promoted, you can no longer be the technical expert. And people sometimes have trouble losing that because it becomes a part of them. You need to give up that expertise. The fact that you did that makes you credible with your team. So you don't want to say, I don't ever need to have done that. That's not it. You have to have had experience, and you have to be viewed as somebody that has done these jobs, and therefore you're a perfect person to lead others that do these jobs. But you don't want to continue to be the expert. You need to have your team be the expert, and you move up to something that potentially has even more leverage in terms of putting teams together and working on the right problems and asking the right questions.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to ask you one last question. In a minute, we're going to transition to Q&A, so if the students would like to line up with the mics on either side. When you come down, if you're called upon to answer a question, please state your name, major, and year here at Embry-Riddle. So you go ahead and begin lining up. But Mr. Ayer, for you, our last question is, why do you love aviation so much? Why are you passionate about it?
That's a great question. It's about airplanes. I just like them. And I like the people in the business. It's like, we go to Oshkosh. You guys go to Oshkosh? Yeah. So what people say about Oshkosh is the first year you go for the airplanes and then you go back for the people. I think that's kind of it with me. I still have an airplane and I love to fly, but what I love even more is the people in the industry. It's just a dynamic industry. There's always something happening. There's personalities. It's a fun business. It actually is a really fun business. And so I can't quite get away from it. I'm still, serving on boards and stuff and kind of in the fringes of what I used to do. So I think that's it.
Okay. Do we have any audience questions? Any students have any questions?
Hi, my name is Kelly, and I'm studying the Master of Aviation Finance. I'll be graduating in May. So my question, we're currently studying aircraft financing in class, and so I wonder how does Alaska design its aircraft buy versus lease decision, and has that strategy or rationale been evolved or transformed after the merger with Virgin America?
That's a really good question. I don't know currently. I know what we did, as I recall before, was to have, certainly if you don't have the cash available, you can't pay cash for airplanes. Then it's a question about bank financing versus leasing, which tend to be kind of equivalent. I mean, leasing is a form of financing. And so it's kind of like, what's the best deal at the time? And we had a mix. We had a mix of owned airplanes with debt and leased airplanes. As we executed this plan, and we had so much success with the profitability of the company, at one point we actually began buying airplanes for cash, which seemed like a decent idea, and I think Alaska's probably still doing that.
Thank you for your
You bet.
answer.
Thank you.
All right. Hello, speaker. My name is Yu Xing, and currently I'm doing my master program in aviation finance in Embry-Riddle, and I'm also in that class. So I have some questions for you, especially about the merger with Virgin America in 2016. So that was a very successful merger. After that, Alaska became the 5th largest airline in the US. But here's a new issue come with that merger, because Alaska used to operate all Boeing aircraft.
Right.
But after that, they have to operate both A320 and 737. So, like we know, it's very costly for those training cars. So, can you share with us how did your company deal with that issue?
Yeah, so I actually wasn't there. I retired in 2013, so I wasn't there for that Virgin discussion. But I can imagine it was a concern that a mixed fleet compared to a single fleet is not as cost effective, for sure. And you have not only the maintenance costs of the airplane, but you've got the crew costs and a less efficient pilot usage, utilization of pilots. But there's economy of scale at the same time. So certainly if you had 5 Airbuses and 150 737s, there'd be no question you wouldn't want to keep the Airbuses, because that drives a huge amount of additional fixed expense. But if you have a fleet of 70 Airbuses, then the per unit drag of that extra airplane type is diminished. So I think Alaska's looking at that. And the other thing is, does the Airbus do anything unique in the marketplace to what the 737 does? And I think the conventional wisdom would be a 320, an A320, Airbus A320, and a 737-800, for example, are pretty equivalent. In fact, the 737 might have some advantages in terms of range and payload. The westbound transcons, I think, are challenged in the wintertime when there's a lot of headwind. I think the A320 is challenged to make that trip with a full load, whereas the 737 is not. An Airbus A321, on the other hand, I think has some unique characteristics compared to a 737, say 900ER. So there might be a reason you'd say, I'd like to get some more A321s, but that's not a reason to keep a mixed fleet if there isn't enough of them. So I just would say this is something that Alaska is probably dealing with right now. They're thinking about it. They're doing analysis on it, and we'll figure out what are the pros and cons. And then I think they're probably in a position to make a bigger fleet order at some point. And big fleet orders are always exciting because you can drive lower costs through the manufacturer. Volume matters to manufacturers. So they're probably thinking, I think they said on their last earnings call, in fact, they were thinking about a bigger fleet order, and exactly the question you raised, that they were starting to really wrestle with that and come to terms with it, which way they wanted to go. Great question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We should probably go over here. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Miles Anderson. I'm doing the MBA, and I wanted to step back since you said you're not doing the technical stuff anymore. Obviously, here as a student, one thing that I've learned is that experience, when we gain it, it's never free, but you can either get it the cheap way or the expensive way. So I wanted to ask you, what's a piece of experience that you learned, maybe the expensive way, that you can give to all the students that are
Save some
entering
money?
the mark? Maybe we don't have to learn it the expensive way.
Well, it's a really good question. I think big picture, I didn't have enough appreciation for how important people are in an organization. And maybe it was, I was thinking, I understand how important people were in a face-to-face, say in a marketing or sales role. I don't think I understood it in a technical role. I think I used to think, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I used to think people were, it's kind of like, they got a technical thing they do, and if we could find a machine to do it, maybe it's kind of the same. And I just didn't realize the value of humans in this equation, and how people, the esprit de corps, positive or negative, right? But certainly on the positive side, if people are working together and they're a bunch of smart people that are challenging each other to develop better technology and better processes, you can't do that anywhere else. You can't just plug something in the wall and have it do that, right? So I think I didn't have an appreciation for how important people are, and then that gets to how are we at attracting and retaining talent? That's a really key question. And a closely related one is so what is our employer brand? And does it differ from our customer brand? And what you want, obviously, is this kind of kick-butt employer brand. This is a great place to work. And you can do all kinds of cool stuff at this company. You'll work for somebody that cares a lot about you, that wants to see you get ahead, will support you. They're willing to, they have a budget to spend money on technology, on cool technology stuff. They have a vision for technology. I want to be a part of that, just as an example. And I just didn't have an appreciation for how powerful that could be. So people matter, and change matters a lot too. I mean, that's all we're going to have is change. And so if I put those two things together, I come back to, it's great you're doing an MBA, because what I think is, everybody's important in the company. This isn't to say one is better than the other, but what an MBA will give you is a perspective on the business side of the thing. And as you talk about people and change, to me, that points squarely at leadership as being important. Leadership matters in an organization. If what you have as the raw ingredients are people, and what you have as a dynamic is just rapid change, leadership matters a lot. And how leaders think about things, how they relate to their teams, how they communicate, how they set initiatives, how they incentivize, how they course correct, all that stuff matters a lot. And so having the background that you're now getting in an MBA program, I think gives you a little bit of a springboard to move into a leadership role, a senior management role, maybe a little bit faster than you might otherwise, because you kind of people talk about an MBA being worth a few years of experience on the job. By getting that degree, you do case studies and you kind of experience a whole bunch of things more rapidly than you would otherwise in the course of a normal job. So bottom line is, I think you're setting yourself up well to be a future leader of an organization if that's what you want to do. And I guess I would just encourage people to think about that. I asked earlier today if there's a business minor here, and I just think that to me that would be interesting to have a combination of, and I don't know if you can do it in 4 years or even 5 years, but if you could have a combination of engineering / aviation and business, I think that's a pretty dynamite combination for what the world's going to need going forward. You bet.
Pretty conclusive.
And the answer is yes, we do have a business minor. So for the engineering students and pilots out there, there's a business minor in the O'Malley College of Business.
Cool. Excellent. We go over here?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. My name is Freddie. I'm a MSAF student. So my question to you would be, being a leader within such a customer-focused company, right? How do you see the relationship between profitability and quality? Do you think there's kind of like a paradox between two of those, or like, how do you see that?
It's a very good question. I actually don't. I actually think the two need to go together. I think because the more customer service you are, the higher the degree of customer service, the higher load factors you're going to have on the airplanes, the higher ticket price you're going to get, the more demand there's going to be for your product. So I think the two go together, and I think that's actually an important thing to tell people. Otherwise, people say, "I got to cut some costs here in order to make more money," and yeah, we're going to take away. It's a little bit what the airlines have done. Right. I think it drives me crazy sometimes to see the short-sightedness. Let's shrink the pitch on the seats. Let's cheapen the product, and some of this pricing stuff where they've gone to basic economy and charging for carry-ons. I think that's a little bit of a bridge too far in my mind. I'm maybe a little old-fashioned, but I think this, yeah. And I'm sure there's documentation back in the corporate office where they've got it all on spreadsheets and it's all figured out exactly what's going to happen. But at the end of the day, if your customer, somebody said, at some point you can make a pizza so cheap that nobody will buy it, right? And so I think we have to be careful.
All right, thank you.
Okay,
sir.
you bet. Over here.
Hello, sir. My name is Joy Bai. I'm another aviation finance major. So you spoke about that your company, you value the safety more than other companies. So I want to ask you a little bit about how does your company plan your maintenance of your aircrafts, and do you contract it out to another company? Do you do it yourselves? And does value and safety a bit more than other companies makes maintenance more expensive for you?
Another excellent question. I wouldn't characterize it by saying we value it more than other companies. We just value it a lot. I can't speak for what other companies do, and I think the whole industry is really safe. But I think the questions you raise are good ones, and so outsourcing heavy maintenance. We actually did that. We used to do a combination of outsourced and insourced heavy maintenance in Alaska. As part of the transformation, in this 2010 plan, as we called it, we decided that there were providers out there that could do maintenance better than we could because they do it all the time, and more effectively and efficiently and actually at a lower price. And so we should not have heavy maintenance in-house. We ought to have a very robust line maintenance operation at our company, but the heavy maintenance ought to be contracted out to people that this is all they do. And somebody that sees 100 737s a year is going to do a better job than somebody that sees 10. And you can probably also drive some better economy through that. And having one or two providers that you give most of your business to is probably going to be helpful as well in terms of them seeing your airplanes and whatever is unique about your maintenance program. So we came to terms with that, and I think we're happy with where we ended up. Doing it yourself doesn't necessarily mean it's better, but you've got to, at the end of the day, you are still responsible for your maintenance. And if something happens, you can't say that was XYZ maintenance provider that did it, isn't our fault. That doesn't work. That doesn't fly at all. It's still your responsibility. It's on your certificate, and you've got to make sure they're doing your work, which is why we always put people in those facilities. We always had vendor maintenance. We had a little vendor maintenance organization of people that would go to those facilities and oversee the maintenance, especially the early airplanes, as we started with a new vendor, and make sure that it was going well. And they would be in the loop at all times during a heavy check. It's really important. You're responsible. You bet. Yeah.
Hey, I'm John Brooks. I'm an MBA student and a pilot.
All right.
Alaska Airlines is pretty well known for the steps it's taken to reduce its carbon footprint.
Mm-hmm.
Could you speak to the economics of that for an airline, and if you were, or what your role was in those decisions, and if other airlines can mimic that in whether larger or smaller?
I think it's the same thing. I think the things are aligned. I think a lower carbon footprint and a lower cost operation are aligned. The one exception might be biofuels, where the cost per gallon is higher. But in terms of everything else you do to have a lower footprint, a carbon footprint, it actually reduces costs. Perfect example is doing single engine taxis, right? You don't want to sit out there waiting for a delay at an airport in a line of 20 airplanes with both engines running. So we quickly put in place a procedure to only do that on one engine. There are other things with next gen procedures around airports where you reduce the track miles that the airplane flies. You're going to burn less gas, you're going to emit less carbon, you're going to get the passengers on the ground sooner, you're going to have less block time, you're going to have a greater profitability, lower costs. I think those things are generally aligned. And so we became big fans of these green initiatives. Boeing has an eco demonstrator. Every year they have a different airplane. Maybe some of you have even been out there and seen it, or interns worked on it. That's a very cool program. And Alaska's really interested in what they're doing, and we want to be a part of that. So leading edge, leaning into green is something that Alaska is proud of.
Thank you.
Question?
Good evening, Mr. Ayer. It's a pleasure being here with you. My name is Alexander Prado. I'm a bachelor in aerospace safety with minor in business administration and flight.
Cool.
And my question for you is, in big companies, we see sometimes a clash between the financial department and the safety one. Basically, sometimes you need to sacrifice lots of budget for a little safety. I want to know if you experienced such a clash in the Alaska Air Group, and how did you develop that resilience of safety culture, especially in that tough period for the airlines?
Excellent question. You have to make it important by where it reports. So safety reports to the CEO in my book. Always has, always should. In fact, it didn't in Alaska for a while. Safety needs to report to the CEO, and the board, who the CEO reports to, needs to have a safety committee, which is something we put in place following our accident. So we have a board-level safety committee that gets all of the reports from the vice president of safety, along with the other officers in the company. So it's just, you make it prominent, you make it important, and you don't let finance, it's just like finance reports to the CEO, safety reports to the CEO. The CEO is the arbiter on that, on those kind of calls. And you approve the budget for safety, and you look at the programs and the effectiveness and their metrics and scorecard and all that. You just need to make it happen. You need to exert that kind of an org chart to have it happen. You can't tolerate people picking apart safety.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay.
Hello, my name is Jack Bergsman. I'm a freshman and I'm studying aviation business administration here. My question for you is, as you probably know, Southwest recently entered the market for flights to Hawaii, and this was a big disruption for the market. You talked earlier about partnerships. So my question is, could you see a possibility for a partnership between Hawaii and Alaska? For example, could you see them engaging in some sort of a code share agreement, or if the DOT would allow it, a joint venture, which would allow them to feed each other's flights and gain some pricing power in the market?
That's certainly one of the possible things. I have no idea whether anybody's looking at that or not. But competition often drives new partnerships. People want to kind of align and get some synergy out of their joint operations. So that's certainly something that could happen. It's happened in other places.
Thank you very much.
It is interesting to see Southwest going to Hawaii, and they're flying inter-island as well over there, which is interesting. Not just from the mainland, but they're flying inter-island, which is giving Hawaiian a little bit of a run. Hawaiians had to lower their fares to compete. But competition is good for consumers. I think it's okay.
Thank you.
You bet.
Good evening, Mr. Ayer. My name is Christian Wood. I'm a fourth-year student studying aviation maintenance science with an area of concentration in maintenance management. During your talk, you spoke about the importance of asking the right questions, asking the tough questions, and then, execution. And in my previous internship experience just this past summer, I was working on a customer quality team solving, high-profile issues in recently delivered aircraft. And at one point, I was cautioned about asking questions that were above my pay grade. And so I was wondering if you had any...
I got accused of the same thing, so don't worry about it.
I was wondering if you had any advice for young professionals entering the field about how to find that balance between towing the line and then being assertive.
Mm-hmm. You guys are asking great questions. That's another great question. I think you want to always be respectful, and you don't want to act like you already have the answer. You're asking because you're curious, and curiosity is a great trait for somebody that's entering the business world. I would encourage you to keep at it, and maybe find somebody else to ask the question to if whoever asked you didn't like it. But I wouldn't back off. I think it's great.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Okay, over here.
Good evening. My name is Maria Caselo, working on my Master of Science in Aviation Finance, graduating next year. First of all, thank you so much for your time and for coming to Embry-Riddle. We appreciate you sharing your experiences with us. So my question is related to also the CO2 footprint. So lately, airlines have felt more pressure due to the negative impact they have on the environment. And my question is specific to, there is some initiatives that will reduce the cost due to the better efficiency they will have, but there is other initiatives that might make the airlines spend a little more. So what do you think that this cost should fall on the airline, which is the emitter, or on the passengers?
Well, it's maybe some of each. I think we want to be responsible with the environment, And the extent there's a cost for that, then it's fair that everybody share that. On the other hand, I think, as I said earlier, I think a lot of the green initiatives actually are cost savings. And to that degree, there's some offset. I think we need to work through this. I think it's an area, I mean, economics, you know, this is one of the areas where pure supply and demand economics doesn't necessarily cut it. Because we've got, it's called an externality, right, for those that have taken economics. And so you've got something that nobody's paying for that's creating a harm that we're experiencing. And so there needs to be some, where there's a net cost, there needs to be a system for how we levy that. And I think, you know, it continues to be a debate politically in other places. But I want to be part of the solution. Environment's really, really important. Okay?
Thank you.
You bet.
Good evening, sir. My name is Iru, and I'm also of aviation. Wait a second, I'm too short.
There you go.
So before my question, a really quick question. I want to know, like, which department were you in before you became CEO? I'm not asking this because I want to know how to be a CEO. I just want to know, like, because people from different department working for different, have like different perspective to looking at things.
Right.
So,
Well, it's a good question because I jumped around so much.
Oh.
So I think it was marketing, planning, and operations. I had experience in all three of those areas. And so I became chief operating officer before I became CEO. So I didn't come up through one organization. But you see that, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think I was a little bit of the poster child for this lateral move thing I was talking about. So
that will give for our picture.
Yeah. But you see finance people, you see our operations people, you see people that become CEOs of airlines come from a variety of areas. I kind of came from a bunch.
So my question is, I'm doing like several aircraft selection cases right now, but I noticed that Alaska Airlines like ordered 37 Boeing 737 MAX. So what would you say like Alaska should do with those orders?
So I'm not sure I heard the question. Alaska only has, I think, 3 MAXs right now.
But they ordered like 37 new,
Well, I think the question is Boeing going to be successful in getting this airplane back in the air? And the conventional wisdom would be that they are. And the airplane will be back, and it will be marketed in such a way that it's acceptable. I mean, the reality is it's going to be the most thoroughly tested airplane in the history of airplanes, right? So I won't have any qualms about flying on it. So I think it's a little bit of a wait and see, but I think they're going to be successful in getting the problem fixed and getting the airplanes back. And I think it's going to be a very good airplane. I actually do.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay.
Hi, good evening. My name is Nidhi. I'm also studying aviation finance. You stressed on the importance of building the right team or being part of the right team. In your experience, what are some of the qualities or traits that make a great team?
Yeah, good. Well, one of the big ones is diversity. That people on the team come from, and I guess when I say diversity, think about diversity with a capital D, which means in all respects. Gender, ethnicity, is typically what you think about. I think about, in addition to that, those are very important. I also think about experiences coming from different parts of the company or the industry, different backgrounds, different places where people are from, all that stuff. I think that makes really good teams. It makes really good organizations. And we need more diversity in aviation. We need more women in aviation in particular. And I'm glad to see so many women here. It's great. Yeah.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Anderson. I'm an aeronautical science major. And just a brief background, my mom's been with Alaska Airlines for 26 years, flight attendant for 21 years.
Oh, wow.
She started as a baggage handler, and she's been a flight attendant for the past 21.
Fabulous.
As of last week, I just accepted my offer to be the chief pilot intern with Alaska Airlines over the fall. And I grew up with Alaska Airlines in Seattle. And I was seeing Alaska Airlines kind of spearhead, utilizing RNAV approaches, eliminating single-use plastics, connecting the communities of the Pacific Northwest.
Yep.
And with my opportunity to go into Alaska Airlines this fall, was there kind of an area that you wanted to see Alaska Airlines kind of spearhead more or get more involved in?
I think it's dependent on where your interests are also. I think there's more to be done on the approach, the RNP front, in Seattle in particular. I continue to be frustrated with the lack of progress there. We've got 3 runways. FAA has built procedures for all those runways and ways to get airplanes transitioned into that terminal area much more efficiently than it happens today. And if you get a chance to work on that, that would be really interesting. I've spent time in the TRACON and the tower and the center, and they're tired of seeing me. I'm not helpful at this point. So you can take over and see if you can get something fixed there.
Funny you said that, because they asked me what I thought the airline's biggest problem was going to be coming up, and I said weather. Just ground delays and utilizing those 3 runways and on communities in Alaska. But thank you, appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you. Good luck.
Appreciate it.
Glad to hear you're going. Okay.
Good evening, sir. My name is Ali, and I'm now in the aviation finance major. So my question is, as you said, the Delta and the Alaska Airlines are competitors in the Seattle hub. So what did Alaska Airlines did to keep the customer when the Delta entered the market? And what's the revenue management strategy for Alaska Airlines to gain more profit from the market?
Yeah, so I don't know specifically what all the strategies were, but I know it was to be aggressive as opposed to backing off. So you have a fundamental question when somebody comes into your market and you think there's excess capacity now. You can say, I'm either going to fight or I'm going to flee. And Alaska said, we're not going anywhere. This is our home. If we can't defend Seattle, we can't defend anything, right? So we got an intruder coming in, and we're going to figure out how to minimize the impact. And so, if anything, added flight frequency went into some of Delta's markets. Said, well, 2 can play this game. You can't come into Seattle. We can go somewhere else. We'll go into one of your markets. And then probably pretty aggressive initial fare actions and revenue management to have lots of discount seats available on some of the weaker flights. The normal stuff that you do, and advertising and marketing, mileage deals, additional miles, credit card. Let's get more users of the credit card, because that locks people in. So a whole bunch of stuff. But when something like that happens, you just kind of get the team together, the whole marketing team. So what are all the tools in the toolbox, and what should we go pull out and go use? And I just have to say, looking at the results, it's been very successful.
Thank you.
You bet.
This is going to be our last question.
Okay.
All right, good evening, sir. Thank you for being here. I'm Joe Betros. I'm a sophomore in the Aviation Business Administration degree program. So my question to you is, I hear constantly over and over again that the ultra low-cost carrier model, such as Spirit and Frontier, which has really excelled and progressed in the past 10, 15 years, especially through those post 9/11 years where most airlines were struggling really hard. What can big airlines such as Alaska, Delta, and American do to kind of compete besides implementing, basic economy? And what do you think the future of this industry is going to look like in about, 20 years when I'm ingrained in it?
Yeah, I don't know. On that last one, I'm not sure I'm qualified to comment very much about 20 years from now. I think all these carriers have a place, and I think the response, the major carrier response, is whether I say basic economy. One thing's for sure is that customers care a lot about fares. There's no denying that, and you can't pull the wool over their eyes. In the old days, there were travel agents, and travel agents you'd call up a travel agent to book a ticket. You guys don't know anything about this, right? But it's actually true. You'd call up a travel agent, and they'd try to find you a good deal. The internet has made fares completely transparent, and you can go shop 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that's what you do, right? So price matters. And there's no getting around that. So where you have a problem with a competitor, where their low fares are stealing traffic, you've got to compete on price. And it's exactly what led us to have to reduce our costs in 2002 and 2003 when we ended up with a big problem, because the other part of that Alaska story was it was a huge brand gain for us to have that be our home and where we started. But it also got us a little bit lazy in terms of costs, because we could charge high fares in Alaska. We didn't have any competition. And so we weren't in the early stages of this transformation. We weren't good at cost control, and we got really good at cost control. So that's just an example of it. So I think there's a place for these other carriers in the marketplace. Elite, they're a little bit different model. Allegiant's a little bit of a different model. I don't think it scares Alaska or the bigger carriers that much. I think you just need to compete, and you see how it evolves.
Thank you.
Mr. Ayer, it's been a pleasure hosting you. Embry-Riddle has loved having you here. We hope you visit us, come again and visit us again. I'd like to thank President Butler, Dr. Butler, Provost Mueller. Thank you to the audience today. But thank you for another successful presidential speaker series.
Terrific. Great to be here. Thank you all very much.